So here we are. It's another Sunday morning in Los Angeles, Venice for me and others in different parts of the state or country. Uh, we're here to talk about the mental obsession and the both effects and the capacity we have to confront it, to talk about it honestly and begin to diffuse and dilute and dissolve the seeming problem, which is the nature of all compulsions. It's not just one or the other that you may be struggling or suffering from. It's the underlying nature of addiction, mental obsession. And the base root of it is the idea that I can do in I can alter thinking or alter reality by thinking about it in different ways, when what I really alter is my experience of reality. And if I miss that point, and I suspect as a race, we've missed that point for a long time because there's a lot of insistence and a lot of anxiety today that is pretty possible to see and witness. A lot of reactivity going on, a lot of people reacting very violently to thoughts of other people and ideas of other people. And that collective nature socially is not any healthier than it is for each of us individually. So if we talk about it openly, maybe there's a chance to actually operate on the basis of nature rather than on the basis of this denatured, unnatural, unhealthy, diseased premise that reality is based on us and who I am is all I think, and there's nothing more to life than that, and I need to constantly fight and try to get even, when in fact, if we're already part of that nature, we're already even, we've already got everything, we're already the only place we can ever be, and we're just simply thinking that we're not. So one of my oversights last week was not to press the record button, and we had an incredible conversation, and I sat and waited for the recording to come through so I could upload it. Realized at some point that it was my own failing, not Buzzsprout being late and delivering it to me, that caused it. And I thought that couldn't be the case at first, and then I thought, of course it was the case. Who else was pressing the button? So I have my moments. That's in 100 episodes. I think that's the first time, but nevertheless, it wasn't recorded. And I wanted to bring up part of what we started with last week, because I think it led to a stream of thought that was worthy of pursuing, which is this idea about, if we think thinking is reality, and I think my thoughts are reality, what are we then thinking about reality? If my thoughts are not reality and just imagined and just considering reality and just contemplating reality and thinking about reality, when I think they are reality, what becomes my experience of reality? What happens? And I would expect you probably each have ideas about that, like we talked about last week.
Oh, are you trying to recreate it? Let's do it.
I suspect it's a thread that's running through all time and space, and it would be worth noting because I think it's the fundamental aspect of this conflict.
Yeah, I'm in. I'm ready.
Yeah. So what would the thoughts be? What some of them came up last week. We can probably expand a little this week, having had a little experience. What would real reality seem like to us if we think we're creating our own reality?
Peaceful. Real reality would be peaceful if we surrendered to it.
But if we didn't, if we really believe,
it would probably be filled with fear. It'd probably be a horrible experience if we hadn't surrendered to the fact that we had surrendered to it.
Yeah.
It'd be scary. It'd be super scary.
Bingo. So the idea of self-centered fear, my experience, my estimation, is based on just that. That the self I think I am, because I think that thinking about my thinking itself creates reality, I make believe that I am the product of that reality. I've created my own reality, as though there was no other reality before I created it. So what I think of reality all of a sudden, and that it's scary rather than what I'm doing in relation to reality and my own thinking is scaring me, because I'm thinking of it incorrectly. I'm thinking of it wrongly. I'm thinking of it as the only thing it can possibly be when it will never be that thing. And thinking life is impossible rather than the impossibility of my thought is making me aware, while I'm excusing myself from being responsible for that thought by thinking it's life that's impossible, and that people are impossible, and that it's impossible to communicate this to other people. It's impossible that everybody will ever listen. This is impossible and that's impossible. When in fact, life itself, on an absolute basis, is the source of all possibility, which includes thinking that the impossible is possible. So it isn't something we can't do. It isn't something we shouldn't do. But when we do it, we have an experience that tells us something is wrong. So we got to the answer a little quicker today.
Well, I was thinking this is where the co-conspirators come in, because when you're fearful about thinking that your reality of life is real, you can always get someone to agree with you. You can tell them your sad story and your fears, and they're like, yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about. So that our group is kind of the opposite of that, because we pull each other out of the fear by helping each other surrender to the fact that we aren't all that there is.
Well, and in the absolute terms, we're never really in the fear. We're only using that to justify there's nothing we can do about it, so we can claim to have nothing to do with it. We're literally creating an experience in thought, which is effectively like a dream that's become a nightmare.
Yeah.
And like any dream, you seem to be in it while you're having it.
Yeah.
And if it's a nightmare, very few people I know wake up and say, I got to get back in there.
Oh,
Most people say it was a dream. Thankfully, that's a dream. That was a nightmare. I'm awake now. I'm not experiencing that. And most of the imagery that seems so vivid and so thick and so compelling and so intoxicating in a nightmare or a dream very much dissipates in the first few minutes, starts to leave fragments behind, but the totality of the experience just disappears as soon as we're not in it. And it's the exact same thing with this thinking.
Yeah.
Yeah, James.
I was saying I had a funny experience last night where I got to see my thinking pretty intensely. I was walking my dog, and I had him off leash, which sometimes I probably shouldn't do, but I do. And I was walking into my gate with him, and I didn't notice. I turned around and looked, and I saw him for a second, and I turned back around, and he was gone. And so I was on the phone. I got off the phone really quick, and then I started just yelling for him. And then immediately I thought he must have been kidnapped or something bad happened. Like I went immediately to like these really dark thinking and running around. I'm asking people like, have you seen a white shepherd go around? And I'm panicking. And then I'm like going through the thoughts, like if I lose him, what am I going to do? Like, how am I going to get through this? And just kind of being steamrolled with that. And I definitely have like the misjudgment of like being responsible in the moment versus like blaming myself for previous. So I'm like, I didn't have him on leash, I didn't pay attention and all that. And then as I'm walking back, and I finally was like, all right, I got to regroup myself. I go back, and he had snuck in behind me into my gate when I had opened the gate, and he's just sitting there staring at me behind my gate. Like, what's up, bro?
You know what he was thinking?
What?
What's wrong with you?
But when the funny part is, as soon as the first person I asked, which was right next to the gate, was some kid, and he was looking at his phone. And the first thing I'm like, hey, did you see a shepherd? And he goes, yeah, he ran that way. So I don't want to blame that kid, but I was like, I remember, anyways, it was funny because it was like not long enough to like, cause maybe more unnecessary damage, so to speak. But
you can see the outsized reaction for the circumstance, right?
Sure.
Outsized, meaning it becomes completely, almost your entire experience becomes gripped and intoxicated with the problem. So now I would suggest that those circumstances aren't causing it. The cause is a predisposition to that thinking that's being revealed by those experiences that are all just lessons. They're actually an opportunity to say, look at what I'm capable of doing. There must be something going on in me on a regular basis that I don't even think I'm doing to have that kind of cause become so glaring so quickly.
Yeah, I mean, I can see that piece. I haven't figured out the solve for choosing to think, positive thoughts in those crisis moments or perceived crisis moments.
So it's not, this isn't, our discussion isn't about trying to get over it so we can bring balance to imbalance. It's starting to notice that if we're doing that thing and we start to have it that way and start to notice that there seems to be some inherent tendency toward that, we're going to look at it from the most elementary standpoint rather than the particular standpoint having to do with the situation, the circumstance, that we think we need to manage it. We need to throw the toggle switches a little bit to deal with it a little better and bring some positivity to the negativity and wonder why that just keeps going on with 100 new circumstances during the month of that same thing, that same electric shock that goes off where you're all of a sudden, where are my keys? Where are my keys? I immediately think somebody stole my car.
That's what I thought when he said he lost his dog. The second he said it, I thought, he's not overreacting. That's a live thing. I freak out daily about my keys or my expensive dark glasses. Or
well, let's say, just for sake of consideration, that is really revealing this predisposed idea that we're maintaining that we don't think we're maintaining. And we think that the job of life is constantly trying to manage that thing. The first step talks about unmanageability. I would say that out of control means no control because there's nothing to control in that. If we're starting the thought that's leading to that and then trying to refuse to accept the effects we're creating, we're ignoring the problem we're creating. And ignoring it does not lead to intelligence, but ignorance. It's a stupefaction, a dumbing down, a numbing of our experience to say, I don't have anything to do with this. What I need to do is fix the effect. So we've reversed the whole problem and thought that the cause is now the effect, and we keep treating the effect over and over again. And this is widely popular in mental issues. Take pills, feel better. Drink, feel better. Take drugs, feel better. And wonder why it is we can't ever feel better enough to resolve the problem. We're not looking at it honestly and living with it, beginning to embrace it and say, oh, this predisposition, if this has been going on as long as I suspect, there's thousands of generations that have built cultural ideas that seem to make so much sense because everybody thinks them. And to Jana's point about the conspiracy, some of this conspiratorial thinking has gone back so far that we just take for granted it must be true because everybody seems to think that way.
well, yeah, and I feel people get preconceived ideas about other humans, you know what I mean? And then they're disappointed that that person didn't fit into the box that they created for them in their mind. Like people have preconceived ideas about me sometimes. They're like, well, I'm sure you blah, blah, blah. And I'm kind of like, yeah, no. Like
so if you see that in other people, you think you might do it?
Yeah, I'm positive I might do it, but I don't have that much of a social life, so I can't really be pointing fingers very often. It's mostly at my cat.
So you have an antisocial life.
True that. I missed my Sunday meetings, clearly.
So the revelation here is the seeing that, what I know when I have a thought about somebody else that's spiteful or contemptful or reductive in some way, and I just think they're idiots, which I have a lot of them.
I didn't mean negative though, Jack. I just meant preconceived ideas about how they thought about life and stuff.
Well, I would say that any thought we have about them that isn't accurate would be a negation of them. Their essence. And if we have an essence that we all share and start seeing that in each other as being nature and not something that we can talk our way in and out of, all of a sudden the source of that problem becomes a little more immediate to my experience as something I'm doing rather than something I've categorized them as being. Do you follow that, Jenna?
Yeah, our essence is our incorruptible innocence. I mean, that's clear. If we could stay in that zone, we'd all just be living in the love and there wouldn't be any fear.
Okay, so if you're always in that zone because we can't get out of that zone,
right?
All we're in is the fear we have about the thinking we're doing that's incorrect about that zone and those people and those things and those ideas. And that's the immediacy, again, of the awareness that this is sourced only in what we're thinking, what I'm thinking. Nobody impacts my experience greater than the impact my thinking has. And when my thinking is wrong about something and I think it's right, I'm the one that suffers the inner conflict. But my own inability to admit it has me then think it's everyone else doing it so that I can try to escape culpability for the responsibility I have in it. So it's beginning to just notice the full circle of the experience and notice that to your point, James, that trying to positively think is trying to negate the thing that's happening, rather than saying, wow. What I learned was that I have a great predisposition to thinking much is wrong when I have any thought that's out of the order I imagined it would be. Where are my keys? You know, and what I learned in that too, which was very interesting, we talked about this a year ago or more, is that as I started to say, well, if they're my keys, I was probably the one who had them last. And if I think they're lost, I probably know where they are, but I'm stuck in that loop of fear that comes from immediately relying on thinking I've done something wrong, because I'm living with a present state that feels wrong a lot if my thinking is based on this idea that I'm the creator of reality. And to some degree, I have lots of those thoughts left. I don't know what they all are individually, to see that reactive nature that rears up at times when little things happen and they become these exaggerated, massive things, like losing my key. But what I started to realize is if I was the one that put them down, then I know where they are. I've just conveniently forgotten so that I can blame the keys for the enormity of my reaction, rather than starting to look at that reaction again and say, this is the same reaction I have in 100 different circumstances on a daily basis that seem to overrun my expectations, my ideas about what should be happening. So if I think my thoughts are real, all of a sudden I expect the only thing that's ever going to happen is what I think is going to happen. So I'm living in a wishful fantasy, wondering why things don't tend to go that way, and thinking life's difficult when it's the difficulty I'm imposing by the presumption of my own thinking that I'm causing. It's a big oy vey.
Well, I have found that within my realization that what I'm thinking isn't true and that I'm not creating my own reality, that literally I'm grateful all day long when I like to almost try to conjure up my fears or my like before I even go to look for my keys, I'm not going to know where they are, and they're exactly as they should be because I put them there, of course, and then I find them. But all day long I'm going like, thank you, universe. Instead of all day long being in the fear, I'm kind of exaggeratedly in gratitude. Right. But it works for me, and it keeps me out of my head. And I'm always surprised how smooth everything can go if I surrender to everything and I don't get in that fear. But sometimes I conjure up that fear to give myself the release of being able to find something easily, or to figure something out, or be decisive about something. So I have a lot of gratitude.
Let me add to the brilliance of that comment, Jana.
Okay.
My experience is we're creating the problems to offer perspective where we don't think we have it.
Yes. Okay.
That knowing nature is saying, look, you can't see your thoughts. Like we can't see our own eyeballs. We don't wake up in the morning and say, I can't see my eyeballs. Where is it? We just open our eyes and they work, right? Yeah. But the eyeballs we have never see the eyeballs. We never really see our own faces except in a mirror. And people say, well, that's me. And I say, no, that's an image of you. And that image happens to be backward. And it's exactly what this thinking is back. It's a lie is only trying to be what it's not. So if something's true and we're trying to say it's false, it can't be false because it's true. If it's false and thought to be true, it can't be true because it's false. So the nature of a lie is a conflict of opposites. It's a conflict that is created by a decision we make about something that isn't right, that we think is right, that isn't real, that we think is real, that isn't true, that we think is true. So to notice that conflict as you just described and then utilize it as an advantage and perspective is to start thanking others for participating in that rather than blaming them for causing it.
Correct. And it's amazing and beautiful. And I've been in a pink cloud for months now. It's the craziest thing.
Well, just remember, it's a pink cloud. You know,
I'm acutely aware of that.
Well,
but I'm not conjuring up defeat.
To James' point, you know, there's a place called Douche Machine on Lincoln and Venice Boulevard. And they always have these very clever quotes from Mark Twain and stuff. And one of them recently was, live in the dream, try facing reality. I thought that's a very good comment. But to James' earlier point about thinking positive thoughts, and to your point about developing that, when you began to develop, Jana, the opportunity to see that that freedom was there to think about it any way you wanted, you began like somebody in yoga to finally get past the initial stiffness and realize that if you begin to concede the stiffness and begin to stretch the stiffness, eventually you become very flexible. So the inflexibility of thinking starts to actually be, as you said, James, you wanted to think about the positive thoughts. I'm not suggesting you not do those things. I'm just suggesting while we're doing those things, we're still in a thinking zone, trying to straighten thinking out by manipulating thinking. But it's easy by doing that to see how flexible our experience is, because the experience gets much better once we realize that we can counter these things and maybe feel better and have a little more reserve to start looking at them and saying, why am I recreating this thing to always counter this thing?
To get the joy.
Well, it's, if we're maintaining it though, and it's always in some form of imbalance, the joy is starting to notice that the whole thing's a delusion to begin with.
Yeah,
it's starting
but
to notice.
It's part of the fun.
Okay.
It's part of the mind fuck. Like, oh no, I'm going to be freaked out, and then go, you know what? I wasn't freaked out. Everything was fine. And then I have a little parade in my world.
So it's an approach.
Yeah, it is. And Maui is very, there's a lot of political stuff going on right now. So the few little social things that I do, there's just, people are like talking about politics and stuff, and people have preconceived ideas about the way that I think. And I just know that, like, I know that less, for me, what's working is less words is fine with me. And if I start defending anything, I just let it go, and I don't do it with malice or with, prejudice. I start to think about it, and then I go, do I really have that stance, or is that important to me, or do I have enough knowledge about it to even know it? It's just easier for me to let it go. But if you don't respond, people are like these super supposedly loving people, like, will try to conjure up an argument when I clearly state I'm not going to have this conversation. I don't have enough knowledge about it. I don't want to have it. I don't want to be a party to it. I just want to hang out and, enjoy our company or whatever. And they're like, but you do think this. There's always the but. And that but is really, because I believe in no loopholes. I believe in the forgiveness thing has to be 100%. I can't say, well, except for this one thing happened, because if I didn't give it all up, in my experience, if I didn't experience forgiveness for myself first and for others 100% with no loopholes of that one ugly incident or whatever that defines everybody's psyche, it doesn't work for me. But in conversations, I know that if I don't agree to them, even though I've had no conversation, they will conjure up a fight. I ask a question about something that wasn't their party or whatever, just asking a question. And they're like, well, what do you find admirable about that? And I'm like, I didn't say I found anything admirable about it. I ask you a question because you are seemingly knowledgeable about it. And it's been okay. It hasn't been a huge struggle, but I am surprised at how people really want you to think their way. And if you're not even being a party to the conversation against them or anything, they will still poke you to try and get you to either admit you're in agreement with them, or else they want to fight. And I won't do it. I just don't do it.
So let's bring it to right here, right now.
Okay, let's do. Thank you.
If there's an exaggerated opinion about what they're doing, there must be some remnant of something that you're doing that's triggered by that. There's something that's becoming magnified by that experience. And to James's point, to this idea, we can think within thinking and bring more balance to it. And that's one way of managing it. But if we have a knowing nature and notice that there's no imbalance in it whatsoever, and that's ultimately the best source of wisdom and inspiration and intuition, because it's the only source, there's a leveling. And I would say, Jana, that in relation to the imbalance, this teeter-totter that we've talked about over the years.
Oh, yeah.
Is noticing that the teeter-totter has to be on solid ground to teeter and totter. So in our discussion, the absolute nature would be the ground the teeter-totter stands on. to be able to teeter and totter, to be able to go up and down, to be able to go back and forth, to be able to feel better and worse and all that kind of stuff. So nothing wrong with that thinking to do those things. It's only wrong when we think we're stuck. You used the term stuck in your head earlier.
Yeah.
So right here, right now is a term. You never hear people say wrong here, right, wrong here, wrong now. Right? Because right here, right now, everything's right. Because it's the present nature of existence. Everything that happens in the present. It doesn't happen at some other time. And anything that happened at another time is simply a memory of a time that's no longer happening. And if I'm fixated on that, how much attention am I paying to what's happening? I'm making believe that some place that doesn't exist is more important than all that exists right now. It's not going to be a very conducive environment that I'm creating for any discussion. The clarity is beginning to see that when we have things, the book says, admitted to our innermost self, really came to terms. Half measures availed us nothing. Why? Because we can say, well, I'm going to give a little bit here. But if we have the thing, if we really embrace it and start saying, wow, this is something I'm creating, this imbalance, this reactivity is defending something that has no basis. I think there's something to defend in that reactivity. I think my thought is true. I think it's real. I think as a result, there's something to defend, and I'm constantly on guard to think occasionally that I get caught off guard by circumstances, by other people, and don't know how to control the situation, don't know how to manage the situation, don't know how to be in the situation without the discomfort that is revealing to me that I have a greater knowing awareness about what's going on. And I would suggest that that fact that we can be so clear about what's wrong in others is an indication that we absolutely know what's right in them. We're starting to see from the perspective that the clarity we have offers us that distinction to notice what's wrong in the thing, in the distinguished thinking we think we're doing, or the distinct thinking that we think we're doing. It's offering us that. So again, the absolute is always revealed when you think of the totality of something, and always seems to be lost when you're thinking about the limited nature of thinking about thinking as being real. Because the absolute nature isn't limited. It has no limits. It's absolute. If that's the nature of the universe, and we're talking about the universe as being big, all of a sudden that becomes having the universe. I have it. If I don't have something holy, what am I going to let go of but a part of it? What am I going to suffer with? The rest of it. And what am I going to find? That this thing keeps repeating and repeating and repeating in different faces, different places, different times. Now, I'm not suggesting in chapter, let me read something really quick, page 8485, very good example of this. So it says, we've ceased fighting anything or anyone, even alcohol, for by this time sanity will have returned. Interesting. Sanity in relation to alcohol is not drinking. When it comes to thinking, it's not re-stimulating the obsessive thought, which is based on a reactive, defensive, irritated nature. For by this time, sanity will have returned. We will seldom be interested in liquor, meaning we're free. It just doesn't, if it occurs to us, we know we can drink, and we also have the perspective to say, I know exactly where that's going to take me. Now, this applies to any compulsion. Starting to see, yes, I can do that. I'm absolutely free to do it, and I'm absolutely free now to see where it's going to take me because I'm aware of it. I'm aware without restriction. I'm not thinking, well, I can still do it in certain cases and wonder why I struggle and think that I can't do anything but it because I'm setting that
loophole. That's the loophole. In certain cases, there can't be any loopholes. There just can't be.
Right. So having is having, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So if we have something completely, we have something to let go of, absolutely.
Yeah.
And now the difference is starting to see that if there's any remnant of this disturbance in our experience, we obviously have not done that within thinking. Yeah. It doesn't mean that our natural state has been violated or that the absolute nature of being is no longer the absolute state of being. We're excusing what we're doing by blaming life and blaming the nature of nature by thinking unnatural, unhealthy, illogical, irrational thoughts. That's insanity. It's an induced insanity. I'm not a medical professional and I'm not diagnosing anyone.
Yes, you are.
But if you look at your experience, you'll see the discomfort and you'll notice the alarms that go off and the bells that ring. The dashboard is saying to you something's wrong with your attitude and your altitude and the orientation of your flight pattern. And if you continue on that way, you're going to crash. So you may be flying in the pink clouds now, but at some point you're going to find the ground. And there's nothing wrong with the ground because it's grounding. It's actually stable. So I'm going to go on. We react sanely and normally. What's normally? Not abnormally reacting. We're responding. Responsibility is the ability to respond. It's considering what's happening accurately and not fighting it, not denying it, not thinking it's something to overcome or fix or feel better than, but saying, oh, I'm as much a part of this as that other person. It's my perception of them that I'm struggling with. It's the ideas I have that I'm struggling with. I'm not seeing their essence now. I'm seeing their behaviors as who they are. I'm seeing their words as who they are, which means I'm seeing their thinking as their reality, which means I must be thinking my thinking is still real. We will see that our new attitude toward liquor has been given us without any thought or effort on our part. Think of that. We keep thinking about how to try to fix it, how to get better than it, how to think better about it. And this is saying it comes with no effort whatsoever on our part. Why? Because that absolute nature has never changed. It isn't the absolute nature that changes. We pretend the absolute nature changes so we can ignore what we're doing to create the experience that gives us insane ideas about how things actually are. So it's been given to us without any effort on our part. And we're talking now about the thinking. This is talking about the drinking, but it's talking ultimately about the thinking. It just comes. Why does it come? Because it's always there. It's never gone. It's always present. It's absolute. It's unlimited. It's infinite. It's omniscient, omnipotent, all power. That is the miracle of it. We think it's a miracle when it's actually natural. The miracle is that we can think so long and so hard and think that we're not part of it. That's the miracle, that we can be sick and think it's normal.
Well, we can always find a co-conspirator to agree with us that it's normal.
We have 8.5 billion right now roaming the planet. So
true.
it says we're not fighting it, neither are we avoiding temptation. Think of this in relation to the thinking.
Yeah.
We're not fighting it. We're not trying to avoid temptation. We're just living with it. We're starting to actually experience it and notice if it's happening, I have something to do with it. And if it's happening, I am responsible for it. And when I start thinking of it in those terms, I am not thinking about how to manage it. I am thinking about how to have it in such a way so that it will dissolve rather than come up with a new resolution that every December 31st, I have to remake and remake and remake and remake in some new way to finally fix the things that I've apparently not been interested in fixing the entire year. So resolution is very different than disillusion because you're dissolving it. It's like fog and the sun comes out. Fog, what happens to fog? It just vanishes. It doesn't argue, doesn't hang around, just vanishes, it evaporates. We feel as though we have been placed in a position of neutrality, safe and protected. Think of that. What's neutrality? It's between forward and reverse in a car.
But doesn't that like you jump from like step 1 to step 10, doesn't it presume that we've done the other steps to get to that place?
Haven't you?
Yeah. But I mean,
Okay.
yeah, but maybe not as thorough or something. I don't know.
Oh, that's the loophole.
Because we've been thinking about the steps as the words and the steps rather than what Bill tells us they are, which is principles. And if we're thinking about principles, we're thinking about things that do not change. Because if they're unprincipled, they're always changing. If they're principled, they do not change. So again, if we begin to admit that the principled nature of our existence is principled, we stop trying to fix life and stop trying to fix the problem and start noticing the only problem we're fixing is one that is literally induced by our own thinking about things inaccurately as being thought of as accurate. That's it. It's that simple. And it comes, like the book says, 100 forms of delusion, right? Yeah. In full flight from reality, the book says. Why? We think we can outrun it. We think we can outpace it. We think nerves and all the adrenaline that we're using up that are depleting our body's ability to actually function are going to save us while those conditions we're creating are killing us. Literally depleting our body's capacity to get better and heal naturally, which it's designed to do. So safe and protected. We have not even sworn off. We're not arguing that we're not doing it anymore. I don't do that. I don't think that way. That's why, to the point earlier we were talking about, what I learned about people telling stories, if that, they're generally telling a story to help explain why they're fine and why they wouldn't be where they are with what they have if it weren't for this, that, or them, some other thing, some other place doing something. But if you interrupt somebody telling a story based on that immoral premise, they almost inevitably get angry. You know why? They're pissed off that they keep telling the same story, trying to excuse themselves rather than begin to rely on the absolute nature of their dignity, their honorable state of honesty in reality as being their absolute state. Not because they think it's that way, but because they can begin to align their thinking with it, and they haven't. They're trying to prove that that thinking, that story, that line that they've been developing over and over and over again in 100 different ways is someday going to pay off. It's exactly what we did with thinking, with drinking. Same thing anybody does with any addiction, because this is the core of the addiction, the mental condition. So it says the problem has been removed. Why? It was never there except to the thinking that we could fix it. We could deal with it. I could handle it. I wasn't responsible enough. I was responsible while I was acting irresponsibly. My responsibility never left, because that's the basic basis of existence, is responsibility. And the freedom of choice we have shows us that. We're free to choose whatever we want. God doesn't condemn us when we choose things that condemn our experience. That loving nature is the nature that gives us that freedom. If we want to do that, we're free to do it. That's ultimately real love rather than conditional love that would say, well, I'm going to give you the right to do everything right, but I'm not going to allow you to do anything wrong. What kind of learning would there be in that? What kind of process would there? The whole point of time and space would be irrelevant, which it largely is. Because if we already know it and we're simply thinking we're not, the only thing happening here is the redoing rather than the undoing, and beginning to see that this fallacy of thought has never been real. It's a delusion from the beginning. It's an imagination that fantasy is reality, that illusion is reality, when in fact, as illusion is an illusion, it's a pretty creative potential. It's very innovative, has great capacity. So the incapacity we create, in my estimation, shows how willing we are to misuse this functional capacity we have in our thinking rather than use it in a way that is useful to ourselves and productive enough to benefit everyone. When people act in ways that are aligned with nature, everyone starts acting that way because there would be no reason not to. When people learned, when Orville and Wilbur developed that wing, planes have flown ever since on that design. Aerodynamics didn't change. They just isolated what it was it took to get loft in a plane, and it still works today. That is so it says we are neither cocky nor are we afraid. Again, we're neutral. We're not in either position of the spectrum where we have to fight for anything, because we're dead center of everything. What is that? Centeredness. It's not self-centeredness. It's centeredness. It means that nature of centeredness is the nature of nature. Because there are no edges in an infinite space. There are no ends in an infinite space. Stephen Hawking's made a point of this, saying that if anything's infinite, everything is at the center because there are no bounds. Interesting that he lived during the 21st century, and it took that long for humans to notice, even after they noticed that the Earth wasn't at the center of the universe 500 years ago, and had thought it always was because that's where they were looking at things from. They just presumed that that's how we're seeing it. That must be how it is. Just like the horizon seemed to be the end of the world. Looked like an edge, looked like something we'd fall off. The world must be flat. Don't go near it. We're still doing that within the concept of thinking and the bubbles of thought we maintain, and we feel our back is up against the wall, protecting them. And you cannot pop a bubble with a bat. You cannot fight it. You pop it with a pin, and the pin is the point. That there's an absolute nature. It doesn't change. It's absolutely absolute. It's not an option. It's not a negotiation. It's not something we can have more or less of. It's simply the state of being that is our nature, that is always our nature, always where we are, always as we are. And it's not something we each have. It's something we all have that we share, because it isn't divisible by dimension, time, space, none of that. which is why everybody has the potential to get better. Doesn't matter where they are, doesn't matter what they're thinking. Now, Bill talks about honesty several times in the beginning of how it works. The only thing he talks about several times in that first paragraph is honesty. Honesty isn't telling the truth, it's accurately talking about what's happening. So if I'm lying, I'm honest to admit I'm lying. And a lie, once it's admitted as a lie, is no longer a lie. The whole conflict disappears because it wasn't anything that my insistence and my resistance, that thing I thought was impossible to overcome, continued to persist. My resistance created the persistence. My thinking created that idea. My resistance to nature and health and life and truth and reality and all those things esteemable and virtuous is what caused that. My own choices. That is how we react so long as we keep in fit spiritual condition. Last sentence. Interesting. What's fit spiritual condition? I would say it's recognizing that the spirit is the nature of existence. It's the nature of life, whatever it is. It doesn't have to be defined as a God against all the other gods that humans have come up with so they can justify fighting and blame each other because gods sick them on humanity to fix it by killing them. It's been going on through history. It's insanity. It's the same thing as thinking we'd fall off the edge of the world. And when they started sailing, they realized you can't even get to the horizon. The horizon's always ahead of us. Wherever you move a foot toward it, it moves a foot away because it's about perspective, perception. None of the islands, none of the continents that were beyond the horizon were missing while people's thinking was missing that thought. They were all there. They were all inhabited for the most part.
What do you think about all this lenses, Jackie and Gabe?
Think about what?
I just want to hear. I was asking someone else that hasn't spoken yet.
I am processing everything because it's wow. It's wow. I am wow. Yeah. Wow. My brain is like electricity. Electricidad. Wow. It's wow. And I feel like happiness and I feel wow, 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 wow. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You know, last week when we crossed this point, I made a point that I want to get on the recording this week. My
Yes.
brother-in-law, who was basically an atheist, businessman, very successful, lived a very comfortable life, loved to golf, had a lung problem, and he was slowly dying, and his lungs were constricting, and he couldn't breathe, and he knew he was going, and we talked openly about it. He was very, very frank, but he had no concept of God or spirituality at all, no interest in it. And the night he died, my sister said that he sat up in bed, straight up, looked at the ceiling and said, "Electricity," and just fell over dead. Like
Wow.
he was seeing an energy. One of my sponsors, who was an atheist, who hated God because he felt no power of that sort would allow such things to happen, as though God was the blame rather than what we were doing with the freedom God gave us. But he did the exact same thing. His wife said she was sitting next to the bed and he sat straight up and looked at the ceiling and his face opened up like he was seeing something awesome. And he fell over and died. Steve Jobs, if you remember, or if you read his what his family said about his experience. If you listen to some of the near-death experiences that we have, the links at the bottom, you'll hear people's experience of being near death, and not most of them do not want to come back here. And we're all afraid of death. Everybody who seems to be there says, no, don't put me back in that body. I don't want that experience again. They're really reticent. And my sense is because they recognize the purity and they also recognize the impurity of the ineffective approach we've taken humanly. And yet, it's a delusion. If it's a delusion, we're making believe it's true. There's nothing else there. But James, go on with Gabe if you want.
Yeah, I was just Gabe and Jackie. Are you there?
Jackie listens typically. She's either at work or busy with something else. So
Okay.
she just disappeared now that we brought her in. See the vanishing act, how quickly? Just a thought. She's gone. Any thoughts, Gabe? Jackie's back. Hey, Jackie. Any thoughts?
I didn't hear anything. I
For the
heard,
whole-
I heard earlier, but when I was switching, I didn't
Oh.
get to. Hi. Hi, everybody.
Hi, Jackie.
Do you
Hi,
know
Jackie.
James?
Hi, James. Hi, Gianna.
Hi, sweet love. How are you?
Good. I miss you.
Miss you.
So
Nice-
James asked for any comments from anyone who hadn't commented,
Uh,
Gabe included.
Sorry, I had to step out. Son's
Yeah.
dealing with a little thing today.
Actually, it was specific to her.
Specific to all of you. Everyone.
question.
I was just asking if you had any comments or thoughts about what Jack has been talking about, or I was just trying to get other people to speak up.
I really loved wrong here, wrong now. So good. What a good trick to get yourself, because you could say to be in the now all day long and you don't want to do it, but saying right here, right now instead of wrong here, wrong now is a great trick.
Well, and my sense is it's always there. It isn't a trick. The trick is thinking that we can outsmart it and trick our way out of it. And that isn't even a trick. It's just a devastating consequence that seems to be, we've done it so long, it seems to be our condition, our natural condition as humans. It isn't. It's been self-induced, self-imposed by a self that doesn't even exist, that is only thought to exist, that we created by making believe that thinking of itself becomes ourself. So really beginning to digest it. And Mark's coming in. Beginning to digest this and come to terms with it is the having of it, which is what we were talking about today. It's just beginning to, if I say I don't have something, I have nothing to let go of. And if what I have is part of the thing, I can let that go, but I still have the rest. It's like taking 2 rotten apples out of the barrel when there's 6 and saying, okay, I've solved the problem. What's going to happen? They just continue to fester and rot. And may not be as quick, but it's going to be, eventually the geometric proportions are going to engulf my experience.
And then you'll have, what's it called when you have, they make wine in jail?
Oh, yeah.
What's it called?
Puno?
Yeah,
Puno.
Guna, with those apples.
Yeah.
I never
Okay.
made that. I never made it.
Good girl. I don't think you spent a lot of time in prison.
It was something I didn't do. I was arrested a couple times, and
That
all
girl.
because of alcohol for sure. But it's
Yeah.
so like unbelievable. The Jackie today would never get arrested. I have knock on everything.
You're too smart for that.
Right? Yeah.
To get caught.
Gabe, it's been so long.
Yeah. I guess, James, to what I hear your question is Jack does all the talking and you're not so sure. That thing with your dog happened to me on a daily basis. With professional stuff, with family stuff, with everything, just would freak out, panic attacks every day. And all of that has disappeared to the fullest extent. My son woke up this morning, 10-year-old, he couldn't open his eye, 6 something in the morning. It hurts. Ow, mom, whatever. I said, I got a call with Jack. So my wife took him to urgent care just now. And like my wife is very stressed and freaking out, not freaking out, but concerned and stressed. And I'm just like, whatever happens, happens. Like if I knew that it wasn't a big deal. He said his eye hurt and like, ouch. But like for her, it's like, oh, it's pain. He's hurting. We need to go, all this stuff. And I'm like, okay, we'll get some drops and we'll figure it out, you know, and like, so whatever happens, happens. The now is now. We're addressing it. She's taking them to urgent care. I'm going to get on the call with Jack. If I need to get off the call and switch with her, that's fine. Or if there's an emergency, I'll go to deal with that. But like, there's no rushing into the future of, I wonder how my son's going to live without an eye, you know, which is what I would think, you know, years ago. So it's become a great thing to just think that maybe our thoughts aren't true. That maybe just consider that
No.
what you're thinking may not be true in the moment. It's hard. It takes a little practice to turn it around from where the fuck is my dog? Jesus Christ, how am I going to live without my dog? To, you know, just thinking, okay, where did I last see him? What happened? Call his name, you know, all that stuff. Because I used to do that a lot too. I had a dog too, and when he got out or loose, it would be like, you know, he's being hit by a car and we're going to the cemetery today, you know, like so anyways, it's been a great journey with Jack and the thinking and knowledge, and it takes practice and time and really unlearning some of those learned things of the way my mind has worked on the obsession of thought and my doom and gloom obsession of reality. So it's been
Well, and
it's been great.
something you said the other day, Gabe, when we talked, I think it was on Wednesday or Thursday, when you called, you said that exactly what the book just described that I read, that you're not even thinking about it. You're just noticing that it isn't happening. Starting to be aware
being a
that
witness,
some major shift has occurred. And my sense is it's not even a shift. It's literally a dissipation. It just isn't there. Books, it's exactly what that paragraph says in 6 different ways.
yeah. No, it's all true. It can come true. And Jana mentioned it this morning. If you just deal with reality as it is, you're aligned and your thoughts and hopes and dreams and all those things are aligned. And if they're going against reality, you're going to be panicked and feared and without substance and loose and wobbly.
Well, and the idea that we have to be aligned is to suggest that we're ever maligned. All we are is stuck within a loop of thought that isn't possible to create reality of, and yet our experience becomes a manifestation of that effect. And because it's so intoxicating, we think there's nothing beyond it. It's like having a bubble and thinking the only thing in the universe. You can't have a bubble without having something beyond the bubble. And so within the thinking about thinking, subjective and objective is the first movement. It's what you were talking about, James, starting to notice, I can fix this, I can make it worse. You start to notice that it's flexible. Jana was talking about that too, that you can do different things to create different effects. Because the thing we were doing, we didn't think we had anything to do with, was creating an effect that got us so sick. We finally said, we got to do something here and start to change our thinking. So our experience changes. Ultimately, it's starting to see that all that's happening within thinking. It's still happening within a rationale and understanding and thinking and process, rather than saying, oh, I wouldn't know my thinking is wrong if I didn't have an absolute knowing that never changes. That's actually me. It's actually my essence. It's the I of I. It's the I that we all share, the essence of essence, the essential aspect of life and existence. I wouldn't have that. If everything was conflicted, that would be the absolute state, and that would be normal. We wouldn't feel bad. We wouldn't feel that we had to feel better. The fact that we're always trying to feel better is an indication that we know something is wrong. The fact that we're always trying to get over it is an indication that we think there is something there to get over. If it's a delusion, it's literally a thought about a thought that isn't true. And it isn't the first thought, it isn't the wrong thought, it's the thought that it's true that makes the problem. It isn't the illusion of thought, it isn't the imagery of thought, it's the thought that it's real that causes this, triggers this whole succession, chain reaction of interreactiveness that creates that conspiratorial consequence.
Well, for
So
me,
the goal,
go ahead.
Gabe, to your point too, as you were saying, it isn't to ignore the problems. It's actually to get better at dealing with them. This is about being effective and being efficient. And what's efficiency? The least amount of effort for the greatest product. What's effective? Something that works. It actually works. 2 + 2 is effective. It's 4.
That's
2
why
+ 2.
I never drank beer because it's not very effective for the amount of volume. So, I mean, I always feel like on whatever page 31, 32, it says go out and try some controlled drinking, try it more than once. I mean, go out and try some mental obsessing and try it more than once, and you'll
Well, it's
arrive,
controlled thinking.
like
Yeah,
you'll
it's
you'll
controlled
arrive at
thinking.
the same process. You'll arrive.
Well, it also says there, to think because we're managing it, we feel a little better. There's that presumption that it's over. But he says in that same paragraph, if I remember it being there in that same neighborhood, he says over any indefinite period of time, meaning we don't know the amount of time it's going to take before we realize it's not working. Because we live in that delusional state that we've manipulated it, and now it's okay because I don't feel as bad as I used to be. I feel better, and it's over. And wonder why it keeps popping up and keeps reoccurring. Because we've once more managed it in a way that isn't whole, it isn't complete. We haven't simply said there is no reality in that whatsoever. It's simply a thought that I think is real. That's the conflict. It's not having, I can think delusion, I can think thoughts of fantasy all day long and not have any problem. It's when I think they're real that the problem begins. And that is done by me. I'm the cause and the effect. I'm creating both. I can't create one without the other, ever. I can't create an effect without a cause, and I can't have a cause without an effect. That's the relative experience we're witnessing. And to come to terms with it is to have, if you have them both, you're starting to see the absolute nature, because there is no conflict. When you begin having that as it is, it becomes easy to see that when you're experiencing an effect that's disturbing and feels unnatural and abnormal and hateful and spiteful, you know what that's coming from. A cause of thought that is hateful and spiteful because we're imagining we're the creators of reality. What greater crusade could we possibly be on if infinite reality is infinite reality than to make believe it's our thinking that creates it or uncreates it? That is a hateful approach to a loving nature. Self-centered fear is afraid for good reason. And to see that is to see that even in the midst of our insanity, we have a greater sense of knowing, greater sense of awareness. So it isn't optional, it's essential. Essence is essential. It isn't something that we negotiate our way in and out of. It just is as it is. It's always been that way. It'll always be that way because it isn't something in time. It isn't something in space. And my sense is the right here, right now, Jackie, there is no time in the present. It's an infinitesimally small, if it's always new, there's never anything old. So there can't be a time continuum. It's the essence of that essence where we are. What is that? Absolute knowledge, omnipotence. That's the nature of our nature. That's the wisdom. Inspiration, intuition, and wisdom come out of that. Reactiveness, defensiveness come out of desperation. The idea that I'm going to create reality and it's impossible to do, but if I keep trying, I'll finally get there. We're always talking about trying to get somewhere, which is one way of making believe we're not where we are in that right here, right now place. If I need to get somewhere, I'm claiming I'm not here. That isn't an argument for anything healthy. That's an argument for suicide and death. Morning, Harry and Santiago. So the practice that we have the chance to start is starting to notice what we're doing while we're here and how many of the ideas we have are about them and their rather than here and now. And it's not to suggest we shouldn't or can't do that. It's simply to notice that in doing that, we have a certain preoccupation with things that aren't happening. And if my preoccupation is dealing with things not happening, my occupation in my body where I am is not going to be very effective or efficient or functional. It's going to be dysfunctional and diseased and reactive. And I'm going to help other people in their reactivity because I'm going to stimulate it because they're going to sense that fear like a dog senses fear. And that I wouldn't say is the message. I don't think that's the solution. If you act on a principle like 2 + 2 is 4, it doesn't take long before people start using it. They don't think about it at all. In an obsessive state of mind, we're trying to create reality when it's impossible and then wonder why life seems impossible. Well, it's our thinking that's causing that. And it undermines every aspect, every system in our body, because our body is on emergency alert. Because we know something's wrong and our body knows something's wrong and it's trying to correct it and save us. But in fact, the whole reversal of instinct has it killing us because we're depleting all the resources that would normally heal us in the name of trying to put out this fire that we're creating that doesn't even exist. Body doesn't have an opinion. It takes our direction. Obsessive thinking tries to act obsessively and absolutely. It's actually acting certain about its own premise, while in fact the only certainty is that it has no basis. Again, a lie. That turmoil that's caused, we don't have to think we're doing for it to be happening. And if you notice the reactive nature of how we think about others and other things, you'll see the threads of contemptful thoughts, spiteful thoughts, hateful thoughts, loathing thoughts. And you can try to pretend you're not doing it by thinking nicer thoughts. But if you're constantly trying to think nicer thoughts, it's because you're constantly trying to deny the thoughts you're having that aren't nice. And my understanding is, my experience, it isn't honest to lie about what I'm thinking. It isn't honest to try to pretend I'm better than I am in terms of my thinking. It isn't helpful to be dishonest with others. It isn't nice to be dishonest with others. It isn't good manners to be dishonest with others. All those social structures we've created to make things look good and keep people happy and not trigger them means we leave them with their finger on the trigger and wondering when they're going to pull it, rather than offer them the opportunity to react and live with them in that process, because we know that process well enough to be able to withstand the seeming tirade that might come. Santiago, are you coming in again? I'm getting a, are you? All right. So in this process, and James, I'll make a point to your point. In the beginning of today's talk, I said a question, one person answered it. Very often in this process, my experience, not suggesting it's right, it's just something that I've experienced now in almost 100 episodes and years of talking to people about this. But there's often a sense of quiet when people start contemplating what they're doing and what they're thinking in an honest way, because there isn't anything to say. They're not ready to say anything about it. They're not ready to tell their story. They're not ready to repeat the same thing that they normally do about how well they are and how well things are going and how it's going to be okay and all that other kind of stuff. There's a pause in all that. And my sense is that's the beginning of contemplation. And we're asked to practice principles in all our affairs. And I would say that means to use contemplation as an awakened meditation and start to notice that when we're considering things, we're not trying to come to conclusions about those things. We're not trying to answer those things. We're not trying to put them to rest and settle them and get rid of them. We're starting to live with it. And notice that what's livable in life would be the accuracy of those things in life. So if 2 + 2 is 4 and I'm operating on the basis that it's 4, I start utilizing it right away. I don't think about it at all anymore. Obsessive thinking is constantly thinking about something that can't ever be true and thinking that more and more and more thinking longer and longer is going to make it true. That's just insanity. It's never going to work. It's never going to be effective. It's never going to be useful. So where we're operating in scarcity, there's a good chance we're thinking thoughts that are scarce of substance. And the dysfunctional nature of our capacity and our human functional capacity is enormous. So much so that we've created, whether we agree to it or not, whatever we've done that has caused pollution, caused corruption, caused all those things that we are all living with the accumulated effects of, as a species, we don't take credit for that very easily. We want to say we have nothing to do with it. when in fact, if credit's due, taking it would be actually being accountable for it and starting to speak in those terms and say, you know what, we probably don't have to continue on that path, no matter how long we've done it, no matter how impossible it seems. It's only the thinking we're doing about it that gives us those impressions.
Jack, thank you. That is, yes, that is why I'm just, my brain is just processing because it's exactly what you are saying. If we take this and practice, oh my God, that change would be boom, like electricity, like something like,
Well,
when we start noticing what is going on, block, something like
that
that.
it's already it's happening right now. We just don't think it is. That's the sadness.
Exactly.
That's the grief and the mourning and the sense of loss and the sense of having to find something. You can't find something that can't be lost. We keep seeking rather than conceding, and rather that surrender the book talks about, that concession to our innermost self, meaning the self we think we are, finally being replaced by the absolute state of ultimate I that I am in the capital self, not the little small self. The actual essence that we all share, not the thing I think I am individually. Not to say I can't think about my traits, and I can't, when I do those things, I just realize they're things I'm doing. They're not reality. I'm not fighting for the life of this thing. I'm just doing something that's unique to me because I prefer it. I choose it. There's a lot of freedom in that.
Exactly.
When I started being free about being wrong, Jackie, to your point too, when I started doing that, when my head said, oh, don't do that, that's stupid, I started acting on those things. Because if I've set up a reactive nature in my thinking, the thing that could be the most right thing to do, even if it starts wrong, I'm trying to pretend isn't happening so that I can maintain the image and the facade of what I think looks good. Rather than start acting in favor of those wrong things and people started laughing. Actually, I thought they would all be upset. They started laughing because it was so ridiculous sometimes that it would kind of burst their bubble too simultaneously, because it's something that if we're doing something wrong, we're doing it collectively wrong. We may have different variations, but for the most part, we're built on a platform that's almost identical. Jackie, I don't think you've ever met Lenses, have you?
No, hi, Lenses. How are you?
Dear.
So nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too, Jackie.
Do you live in Los Angeles?
No, I live in Monterey.
Oh, okay. California, though. Awesome.
Yes. Nice to
Santiago,
meet you.
I don't think you met Lenses either. Harry, I think you met Lenses last week or the week before.
Harry. Hi, Harry. No, Henry?
Harry, yeah.
Henry? Yes.
I thought I would use Harry or Santiago to help. Sometimes you feel stuck in the English word, though you do extremely well. And you know, the other thing too to mention to you, the spirit of what you're saying comes through often better than people I know who speak English really well.
That is. Yes.
So, but that's sort of a language of the heart, like the book written in AA about noticing that we have this other potential of communication that well exceeds the words, the bounds, the ideas we have that are absolute in nature. There's a knowing of knowing. When we're dealing with issues that we all know and or think, to Gabe's point, the maybe we know, possibly we know, until we say definitely we know, because with a little practice, you start realizing that if you're applying something that's accurate in reality, you're confirmed immediately. There's an ease in process. There's a productivity that happens. Seemingly synchronicitous moments seem to occur that seem so odd, but that's the nature of our existence, that everything that's happening is happening. I've been so primarily focused on the narrow thoughts, like the dog is lost. I'm missing the fact that the dog is standing next to me. And that would be a pretty extreme example, but it's not uncommon. If we think all that's happening is what we think, we are not thinking everything else that's happening is actually happening. So the majority of what's happening would not be happening in that world, and I would feel like I'm in a very small, suffocating world. Even if I didn't admit it, and even if I thought I was doing things to give myself the impression that I wasn't doing it. But when you eventually realize that even a juggler has to eventually put the thick balls down to eat, it's worth noticing we don't have to keep them up in the air either. So talking about it, my experience offers perspective, multiple voices. I did this one-on-one with a lot of people for a long time, but my sense was as time passed, they weren't having an experience of how to do this in public when they left. They thought of it as something they did with me and not always something they could do out there. And by doing this collectively and sharing and talking about the ideas we have and the thoughts we have, starts to give us a broader perspective of the fact that we can do it anywhere and everywhere. If we've been lying everywhere and everywhere about something, why can't we just be honest about it? Certainly, if we can do the most difficult thing and survive, we can do the easiest thing and thrive. Within thinking, we either shrink or grow. And feeling suffocated and trapped is a decision to shrink. We're going to get smaller and think we can hide out. We're going to deny and reduce things down to this narrow view, and we're going to be better. Or we can begin to expand. But eventually, if we're expanding, we're going to also shrink. We're going to do this. It's going to be moving in one direction or the other. It's never. Apparently, there's a train at the beach. So thinking will always change. Knowing never changes. That absolute nature never changes. It's always present. It's always here. It's always available. It's always now. That's the nature of the present. We're always there, simply thinking we're not. So if the problem's in thinking, and we begin to notice that we're naturally responsible, we can also notice that we're capable of acting irresponsibly. And those irresponsible actions have consequences that feel bad, wrong, low self-esteem, low self-worth, because they have no value. Those feelings we're having, rather than become things to escape from again in the addictive thinking cycle, is to start noticing that they're accurately giving us information about the thing we're doing that has no value, that has no worth, that has no esteem, that has no honor, that has no truth. Self-consciousness is defined as undue regard for appearance. Why, if the self we thought we were was conscious, would we be afraid of how we look? Because the idea we have about thinking is an illusion, about self is an illusion. The self we're struggling with, this self-centered idea, it's not centered at all except thinking of itself. And why does obsessive thinking have more thinking? Because when I think about my thinking, what am I doing? I'm actually inbreeding and producing more and more thought and wondering why the thought seems to get wonkier and more difficult. And I got to constantly think about it, manage it. The resignation here is resigning to the fact that we've never done it anyhow. We've never accomplished what we set out to do in that regard. Can't be done. It's ultimately the surrender, the concession. Boom. So the embracing of it is the beginning of that, rather than thinking we have to stop it and shouldn't be thinking it and all those other. If I think I shouldn't be thinking what I'm thinking about that. What am I thinking? I'm thinking that my thinking that I'm thinking shouldn't be happening. Well, that's a pretty tough spot, because if it's happening for me to think it shouldn't be happening, I know it's happening in terms of my experience, and now I'm taking a position that it shouldn't be happening. Well, I'm the one that's making it happen. If I think it shouldn't be happening, I wouldn't even be thinking it. Yet that divestment of thought is so intertangled with this constant impossibility that it seems to make the only sense, when in fact that is irrational and insane. Induced insanity. Notice the silence, James. My sense is that knowing nature is silent and it's perfectly still, and yet it still remains. It isn't in time because it's always present. So while it's still, it's still. While it's current, it's current. It's flowing, meaning it's fluid, it's electric. That energy is present. And energy only is energy when it's a current. Think about that, the word current. It's flowing and present, current. Light and light. It's not heavy, it's brilliant, light. Next week, I will be up at the retreat in Ojai talking about this in person to who is ever there. James will be there, I know. It's a men's retreat, Jackie, but you're welcome. I saw your O.
Isn't that where you met Anthony?
Yeah. That fateful day. So we won't do this next week. The following week is my daughter's memorial, and I believe it will be available on Sunday.
Oh.
And we'll be happy to do that.
Thank you, Jack. Oh. What I am experiencing is very interesting. Oh, wow. Having the
Gonna add-
opportunity to have this movement, energetic transformation is amazing. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Well, and that transformation is a good word because in our physical experience, we're not creating reality, we're transforming reality, meaning it's a form that's in transition.
Beautiful.
We're perfectly capable of doing that. We're not creating reality, reality is giving us the potential to transform it.
Yeah.
Nothing
feel that.
humans have ever made came out of nothing. It came out of something.
Exactly. Oh my God, it's so beautiful. Yes.
Yet the
Amazing.
essence, I would suggest, may well be nothing in terms of things. It's an essence that isn't a thing-based thing because it's not a spatially oriented thing.
Wow.
So sharing this, talking about it, listening, re-listening, which I often do, is very insightful in terms of the hour we spend together. Because while I may think I'm listening, there's a lot that I haven't heard.
Mm.
And hearing it a second time, hearing it when I'm driving, hearing it when I'm not in the middle of directing the conversation, which I suspect is my role in this, is very different. There's a lot of different angles. And the point of that is, too, that the way we look at something is going to determine how we're seeing that thing. And if I'm seeing it a certain way, it's how I'm looking at it that I'm choosing to see it that way. Doesn't mean it's real. It just means it's what I'm doing in thought. And so the education of that is either going to offer me something to learn or something to deny and pretend I don't need to know or I already know or I'm not doing and all that kind of stuff. Those things don't disappear because I'm thinking, like Gabe was talking about. He's starting to notice, in my experience, tell me if I'm wrong, Gabe, but he's starting to notice that those emergencies aren't going to get better by thinking in ways that exaggerate the problem. But thinking clearly, you can address something and potentially resolve it with a higher level of efficiency and effectiveness and function than trying to be hysterical about it and create new problems as a result of it, like racing to the emergency room and getting killed in a car accident. And it seems absurd to mention that, but it happens every day. Somebody not paying attention for a minute. Especially with texting becoming so popular. There's a whole video thing of people getting run over and just walk into the street. Very common. But those mistakes and those seeming accidents aren't really accidental. They're a natural function of dysfunctional thinking. Not paying attention, thinking everything that's happening isn't happening is one way to not pay attention to everything that's actually happening. And we feel depressed over that because we know that we're not fulfilling our capacity. We know, we're aware of it. We know it. Doesn't make us wrong to have what we're thinking wrong. It's a choice we're making with something we're doing. Doesn't become us because that thinking isn't who we are. It's just something we do, something humans do. The knowing, I would say, is who we are. If the knowing nature is who we are, then no matter how we think about it, that does not change. Because the knowing nature can't change. Read Shakespeare's sonnet, I think it's 116, and it's about love. And he talks about the fact that love does not change. When it finds change, it doesn't change. He's talking about that essence. And this has been discussed. Rumi discussed it in Iran, Persia, back in the 11, 12, 1300s. I mean, it's been discussed, it's been recognized, and yet we think of it as something out there that we have to die to get to. And yet by not dying, we're killing more and more people, thinking that's how we're going to get there. We got to do the right thing on earth by killing each other. And we're all participating in this while it goes on. That same thinking is being used to justify other people being less because they don't think like we do, or they do, or whoever their group is. Love you guys. I appreciate this.
Bye, Jack. Love you. Aloha.
I hope I
Love
pressed.
Jack. Will you
I hope I pressed
text us
record.
Jack.
will you text us the information about the memorial or email us?
Oh, sure. If you want to. It's up in Oakland.
Oh, wow.
We'll have one here at the house later in
Okay.
in the year, which was
Okay.
what the announcement actually said. So I'll let you guys know that then for the local folk.
Okay. Thank you.
All right. Yeah, yeah. Hey, Mark.
Bye, Jackie.
Look at Mark on the beach. That's a pretty nice spot, Mark. It's beautiful. Love
Just
you
down the
guys. See
street.
you.
I'm just down the street from
Love
you.
you, Jack.
Yeah, it's a beautiful day out. Looks like
Yeah.
it's going to be cooler than yesterday.
Yeah. It was hot yesterday.
87 here is like a record. I don't remember it ever being that warm at the beach. Normally when it gets that hot, the clouds go up and it becomes 68, or the fog pulls up, but the water's warm, so I don't think it's not doing its condensation or whatever they call that, the moisture, the transition to fog, evaporation. Yeah.
Thank you,
Anyway,
Jack.
thank you guys. I appreciate
Thanks,
this very much.
guys.
Yes.
Thank
Love
you,
you guys.
Jack.
Thank you.
And Jack.
Ciao,
You
ciao.
guys too. Have a great day. Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Harry.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye,
Jack. Thank you.
everyone. Jack,